Good afternoon and welcome to today's client education event sponsored by P.W. Johnson Wealth Management. I'm your host, Peter W. Johnson, Jr. Virtually every one of us will face decisions about care for our loved ones and eventually for ourselves. Yet when the time comes to make these choices, too often we wind up making them in an atmosphere of crisis based on extremely limited knowledge and information. This is one of the most important transitions in life and has major family, financial, and emotional implications. Perhaps the greatest gift we can give our families and ourselves is to have plans in place and to talk about them before we or our loved ones face a critical situation. In this fascinating and highly informative one-hour program, we'll cover the elder care landscape, the biggest challenges and pitfalls that people face, how to deal with challenging family dynamics, choosing from a broad array of retirement housing alternatives, the alphabet soup of professional designations and specialties, available services and resources, and financial considerations. Plus, you'll get a chance to ask our special guest expert your own questions. And in answer to the many inquiries we've been receiving, yes, the event is being recorded, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording in the next few days. The YouTube video will be available at the pwjohnson.com website at that time. So I would like to introduce today's very special guest, Jim McCabe. Whenever one of our clients, friends, or family say they're facing elder care issues, we always, and without exception, recommend that they contact Jim McCabe, who's our good friend and colleague. Jim has over 30 years of experience working with a vast array of individuals and organizations that serve the elderly. In addition to creating care plans for clients, Jim teaches elder care at the college level and is a frequent speaker at professional and consumer events. Jim received his doctorate from the University of California, Berkeley, and holds master's degrees in social work and public health. He's twice served on the board of the American Society on Aging. Dr. McCabe is the author of the book, Solving the Housing Retirement Puzzle, 20 Tips to Help You Make the Right Decision, and is a frequent contributor to journals and newsletters, including the Journal of Practical Estate Planning and Selling to Seniors. He's also one of the warmest and thoughtful people we've ever had the pleasure of working with. Jim is independent and works solely on a fee basis, which means that he can be trusted to provide objective advice that's in the best interests of his clients. His website may be found at www.eldercareresources.biz, B-I-Z. So, thank you, Jim, for making the time to talk with us today and visiting our offices.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
Let's start out by getting a sense of the elder care landscape. What all is included in elder care services and the elder care conversation?
Well, it typically can include everything from nutritional issues, healthcare needs, access to medical programs and services through transportation, housing, and sometimes and often most importantly, just understanding what the healthcare situations are that families are facing as a relative ages.
And what are some of the biggest challenges and pitfalls that people face when they're looking at elder care?
Well, because so often we approach these events as family members or relatives, the first challenge is to understand what I call the it. So if a diagnosis is made around a physical or a cognitive disease, what does that mean in terms of care? What does it mean in terms of the senior's opportunity to be able to stay in their own home? And then the second thing is oftentimes these are crisis driven, and having the time to put a plan in place or to react in a realistic way to make sure you have all the services that are needed to help the quality of life move forward in the most positive way.
So it sounds like each individual situation is probably pretty unique, or you need to look at the person's situation in terms of family and resources and things like that.
Very much so. And Peter, as you know in your practice, family units approach the business of planning differently, or what we call having the conversation. So if there's been a discussion about healthcare needs or financial needs or, gee, Mom, what if? A lot of families don't have that conversation, either because there's resistance on the part of the parent, the senior, or because the adult children might be those folks that are in denial. So family units who have a habit of talking about things ahead of time are easier to work with because they're willing to sit around the table and look at options.
I think that's going to be one of our recurring themes throughout the call, really, is planning ahead, looking at things, along with finding where the people can get the expertise they need to walk them through this, because life is complicated, and we're talking about people here and families and money and emotions, a lot of different factors. What are some of the most common mistakes that people make?
Well, let me put it in the context of situations where it's adult children, typically boomers and their parents, or maybe grandparents who are having this discussion. As an adult child myself, oftentimes I think we have this urge to take over. And that's where the resistance starts. I'm involved because I want to help my parents to have the best outcome, and they tend to see me as coming onto their turf in a situation where I've done just fine, thank you, for my 90 years, so let's make sure we each keep our place in the process. Making decisions in any situation are always best done if I have enough information. And so if a person has an event where there's illness, what does it mean short term or long term? Can we manage it at home? Does the doctor prescribe the right medications? And then one of the delicate issues is, how does this all get paid for? I've worked with a number of families over the years, and I'm talking in your tent here that oftentimes people have not discussed their finances with their children. And even if the child is eventually going to be in the will or on the trust or make some decisions when dad can't, they haven't had that discussion about what the assets are and what's available. So the cost of things and how it's paid for and ultimately who decides is something that is harder for families to get their head around. And then oftentimes I think an adult child will say, well, let's just have mom come and live with us while we get through this little window of healthcare crisis. And sometimes changing the environment like that is a challenge for all of the family members. So I always try to have them take it slow until we know what the problem is, what are the means available to take care of it before we start moving roommates around and chasing housing situations.
I can certainly understand that taking over problem, because the kids, even with the best intentions, will come on. Well, even if they come on gently, I would think that the parents are going to be kind of defensive and saying, oh my gosh, I was hoping that question would never come up, and react to it.
Well, when a parent has a window of dependence, the roles change. So that my dad, whose rule was because I said so, even well into adulthood, I'm the oldest of 7, his view would be that he will make the decision. He will decide which data is important and which isn't. And for us as adult children who tend to move to the fix-it mode before he's done with his considerations of the option mode, it's two different time frames pushing up against each other. And then old business and old family history makes it complicated. So I tend to encourage families to take it as slowly as is possible so that everybody has a chance to be a part of the discussion.
You're bringing back memories of when my father was alive and how awkward it was for me when he became, more frail and more overwhelmed by his situation, that he would be asking me questions. And he was always ruled with an iron hand until that point. So I didn't know whether to step in and be the adult, and it was awkward at best. Maybe it would be a good idea to just make it clear we have a decision to face. Now, who's going to make the decision, and what do we need to do it? Kind of explore it.
Well, and Peter, it's a great example, and sometimes I think it's a lot simpler than that, and that is that The adult children who do this well will say to a parent, "Mom, how can I help?" So they're not pushing an agenda or looking at an outcome that they're going to try and move her to get to, but to try and figure out based on what she thinks she needs, how can they be a part of the solution? And that tends to open up the window of cooperation a little wider in a lot of situations where we can make suggestions when mom's guard's down a little bit.
Well, that's great. Where were you when my dad was
Yeah.
passing?
Well, and the other side of it too is that my mom would say, I'm still pretty good at making decisions. I know me best. And would it be okay if in this situation, if it comes up again, when I think I could use your advice, that maybe I'll call or ask you, rather than having it feel like my kids are the cavalry rushing in here. I'm okay asking you guys, so could we try that the next time? And it gives her control of the situation.
Or maybe hint that, gee, you've got family here that everybody can be on your team, and let's think about how we can use those resources that we have built in. Well, we talked a little bit about the problems that come up and mistakes people make. What would the ideal situation look like to you?
Well, I think it goes back to the word plan. As human beings, I think that we like to plan some things, vacations, birthdays, anniversaries, and so on. But when it comes to those decisions where life takes that left turn, and there's a healthcare issue or death in the family or a tough decision about money, we tend to put those things off. Now, the plus is that I think more and more people are willing to call someone like you and ask a planning question around their estate and their finances, and people are being pushed in the healthcare industry to be more proactive. So the opportunities are there, but that plan really needs to be initiated in a way where people feel like it's important to them to do it now rather than to put it off. And the procrastination is always the thing that seems to be the barrier to helping people get along with being able to plan what's next.
Well, I can imagine listening to this program that we're doing right now and saying, yeah, all right, doing it now is always the best thing, blah, blah, blah. So maybe you could put a little flesh on the bones and describe a situation that you've seen, or a typical situation where people haven't planned it, and what that looks like.
Well, I think people have a misunderstanding of what happens next. And let me use Medicare as an example. There's a pretty significant misunderstanding there that Medicare is a very broad medical insurance that covers a lot of things. And on one side of the ledger it does, but it's an acute care insurance, which is paying for hospital and paying for short-term skilled care, but it doesn't really have any broader footprint than that. And so when people say, well, I just want things to stay the same and I have a safety net that looks like Medicare out there, they don't. So the successes are when people say, I'd like to plan for what my life's going to look like in 5 years. And then maybe in 10 years, it's that kind of retirement planning that comes more on a personal level. And if they build into that, if I slow down a little, or I can't do 200 steps now, I can do 100, or maybe driving isn't as much fun as it used to be, those options get thought about in a time before they're needed. And so if people can start to plan around what they want, I want to stay home, I want to be as independent as possible, I want to utilize my hard-earned money in a way that gives me the biggest bang for my buck. When the crisis happens, it seems that it's much easier for them to roll with that and come out on the other end in better shape.
That's great. And it fits so well with what financial planners do, or wealth managers in our case, that we love helping people get through transitions in life. You know, it's hard enough to keep things going, but the transitions are really challenging times of life, whether it's young people learning about money and becoming independent, or whether it's somebody transitioning to less active control over their own finances and their situation and needing assistance. There's so many issues involved that it's really daunting to even think about, gosh, I'm going to be in a different situation. my relationships will change, my finances will change. There's legal things to deal with, and people don't even know what they're walking into. And it can cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars if they don't know what's available. There's an awful lot of programs and alternatives out there. So as financial planners, we're all about, financial planning. That word is right there. So we're here to do that, and we can ease into the conversation. We can facilitate it. We can bring in the expertise that people need to, as you put it so well, design the life that they want to live instead of thinking about what they're giving up. And I think that's great. I always go for the carrot. The stick doesn't do much for me.
Well, and I think parallel to that conversation, excuse me, what I will often say to people is, my job is to help you be as smart as possible about making the decisions that allow you to stay in control. Whether that's a healthcare situation or a choice about where I continue to live, or I'm staying home no matter what are some options for changing it to make it safe, so that, much like in your conversation with your clients, we're trying to minimize risk to a level that they're comfortable with. So yes, I will become more frail as I enter into my 80s or maybe 90s. And if I think about that now, I can prepare for that to some degree.
Awesome. Very helpful message. So I think it's important that people get the best advice that they can get. And so we have a lot of folks in our Rolodex, if you will, that we call on with different specialties. And you have been just terrific when we've called you in. Immediately people kind of are put at ease and begin to see possibilities where they haven't. But in general, let's talk about the various kinds of advisors and consultants that there are in the area of elder care. I think there's quite a plethora of different designations and titles. How do you know who to hire?
Well, that's a good question, because the alphabet soup of long-term planning has changed dramatically over the last 10 years. Access to information has changed. So I think if people know what you call it or what the alphabet soup is, it's easy enough to go online and start to do a search. But one of the things we found in our work over the last couple of decades is that we will get calls from people asking for information about a senior center or transportation or help with in-home care, but they're not sure what it's called. And they need it in Detroit because that's where mom is. So one of the things we've tried to do is become an information and referral resource for people, just simply based on a phone number and what a program's called. We may never hear from those people again, but we feel like part of our commitment to the broader community is having that information available to people. Now, having said that, the questions about who does it and how does it work tend to end up in three categories. One is the need of the person. Do I need a home care agency? Is there something that I need to do to make better decisions about a doctor or a specialist? Number two, the environment. How do I make my home safer? How do I get to and from my home to church, the doctor's office, the library, my wine club, my bridge club? And then the third thing is more of those estate things that have to do with the actual planning, that planning expert like you, that legal person, an elder law attorney who helps people with some of the paperwork that involves making sure all of my final plans are in place. There are geriatric care managers. I have been one for quite a long time, and these are basically people who help families to connect the dots. How do you find services? How's it paid for? Which organizations seem to do what they say they're going to do best? And so people will use us as someone to find those, or they may hire us to figure out how to put that together. Elder law attorneys, there is a National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys that have been vetted and in some way specialize in working on the legal issues that people need as they do their estate planning. If there's a relocation issue, there's an organization of move managers that have been certified that work specifically with seniors. And it may not be that I'm moving, it's just that I have a no-car garage now, and I'm a little over-cluttered, and how do I downsize the things that I've been accumulating for the last 10 or 20 years or longer. We get calls every week asking about veterans benefits, and I think the VA is a fabulous resource for this. A lot of people are eligible for veterans benefits but don't know it or haven't taken the time to find out. And then finally, if home is no longer an option, there are people who do placement assistance called placement specialists who have a pretty good handle on what kinds of senior housing are available in the community, and most of the good ones are willing to spend time with the family and take a tour and answer some questions and see what those facilities look like firsthand.
Well, there's a number of websites too that people could search on these terms that are up on the slide right now, but we're going to be getting to some of the resources, including websites later that include some of these. Now, I think of you, Jim, as an elder care specialist. Does that term have any meaning in real life? Where does it fit in?
Well, it's interesting because people who are much younger would say that I probably know a little more than they do about the aging process, but if I'm working with someone who's 85 or 90, they're inclined to say, what in the heck do you know about what I'm going through right now? Probably the best lab for me has been two parents in their 90s who have aged well. I'm the oldest of 7, so I think I grew up watching a lot of what I'm helping families manage now. There is an elder care specialization now. In my particular profession, it is the geriatric care manager. I think in addition to understanding what the process of aging is, where we bring value to the table for people is helping them ask the right questions. And sometimes we'll go through a series of questions and then people move on to do the answering and pick the options on their own. Knowing what the services do in the community. I told someone once I'm a little bit like the AAA when you want to take a vacation and you're trying to figure out where the rest stops and the camping sites are. We know where those exits and on-ramps are for virtually everything that might be called into need when people are trying to manage the aging experience. So I think there is a specialty in a lot of industries now that's developed around aging. I mean, the demographics are remarkable. You think 10,000 boomers are turning 65, and starting in January of next year, the leading boomers are going to start turning 70. But the fastest growing population right now is the 85 plus. So we have a society where we're living longer, staying in the community, and that requires that families have some sense of how to proceed. While we're talking about this, Peter, I think it's important to mention you've been involved in this model called collaborative practice for some time, and I really admire and respect the way this has been developed, and I think it's probably worth taking just a minute for you to share with the listeners how that works and what your goal is and the way you're doing that work.
Well, I'm happy to do that. It is a passion of mine, and it's basically a nonprofit kind of movement. It's following on the heels of something called collaborative divorce, which is now, after 25 years, established worldwide in 25 countries and recognized legally in this country by many states as another way to solve disputes, if you will, and keep families out of court around divorce. It's a great model that we've been modifying somewhat to apply to estate planning and elder care. There's so many of the same kinds of issues that come up in these transitions around a family, and oftentimes results in fractures of the family and hurt feelings. Who's going to make the decisions for mom? Who's going to pay for all this care? It becomes a family dynamic problem. And the model of collaborative practice is brilliant because it takes different professions, interdisciplinary professionals, creates a team out of them, and they're involved from start to finish in seeing a family through a transition. So you'll have the attorney who's able to deal with the legal issues and the documents. You'll have a financial professional who's taking a neutral position in advising a family on their options and maybe coming up with some creative solutions. And there's a mental health professional who facilitates communication and helps coach family members on talking to each other. So the idea is that the professionals are not taking control, but they're helping the family find their own solutions and be able to listen to each other and come up with mutually beneficial kinds of paths to take. I think it's been great keeping families out of court, and that's very important, because once a family goes to court over an estate issue, that's usually the end of that family. You're not going to be talking to them for a while. It gets so nasty, and the lawyers, the litigators fan the flames, and it's all about making the other guy look bad, which of course doesn't do any good for the relationship. But we're also focusing on pre-planning and getting families talking to each other early in the game. So if there's anybody out there who realizes, gee, we've got all the pieces we need, but we have it in different parts of the family, and I'm not sure how to bring it up, they're free to contact us, and I'll put them in touch with collaborative people. Really interesting that the judge who's in charge of the probate court here in Santa Clara County, which is the largest probate court in California, is a huge fan of what we're doing, and I know he's beginning to recommend it to the attorneys who practice in his court, and we have our third professional training coming up in January, so it's something that's going to catch on. It saves money, number one. As a financial planner, I should point that out, over the alternatives of suing and going to court. It keeps the court system freed up to do the important work it needs to do. It helps families develop plans that might create a viable future for them too. So, I'm pretty excited about being involved in that.
Well, and my experience in being in some of the meetings with your team where you've talked about your approach, what I think is so nice about the model is it helps to control or manage the emotional costs that families go through if they don't have that kind of support that's aware of the emotional, the familial, the financial, the you like Bobby better kind of thing that can happen with families. It is a multi-dimensional thing that needs to be attended to, and I think that the perspective that this collaborative model is very family friendly when folks are trying to manage these transitions.
Well, we're going to need the help of some good elder care professionals, geriatric care managers on some of these teams, so we're looking forward to including you and people in your profession as we go forward with it. I always tell the mental health people that the communication and the emotional part of it is the key to making it happen. And they say, oh, no, what you guys, your financials, you guys make it all happen. I said, no, we just crunch a few numbers. You guys, you're the ones. That's just, it's a really wonderful component of it.
Well, and the philosophy of that is really the relationship that happens around the table, not only with the families and their parents or kids, but among the professionals who have an investment in starting first with how can I help you, the person, rather than these are my services and these are my tools. Let's start with the need of the individual first.
And amazing when the attorneys shift from taking control, which they're taught to do, to just being like a coach. And sometimes, even when there are two attorneys involved, having them wind up coaching each other's clients is a touching thing to see when everybody gets on the same page. So I should probably give out the website for Collaborative Estates, which is collaborativeestates.org or .com, and get you to the same place, and you can learn more about that. So let's move on to sort of the shift that happens in people's life. As elders begin to need assistance with their activities of daily living, they're often resistant. Like my stepmom said, I don't want to pay somebody to be sitting in my house reading a book. I'm fine. And of course she kept falling, breaking wrists, breaking her hip, all those things. And so there's some resistance that goes on. But after people eventually give in and move or get the care they need, they're usually pretty happy. I imagine imagine you might have a couple of things to say about that.
Well, and I'll echo your words. A lot of seniors will feel like they're giving in, and that they've lost the battle of wills, or that now we're going to do it somebody else's way. When I work with adult children and they're having a terrible time about dad's lack of willingness to cooperate, I try and get them to see where the resistance is coming from rather than the face of it. And for older men especially, there are two tenets: privacy and control. These are, especially in what Brokaw calls the greatest generation, this is a group that had basically been in control of things for a very long time. And while they've backed off of their societal responsibilities, their own lives are the places where they still have that element of control. And when a healthcare crisis, death of a spouse, a requirement to relocate happens, that the very core of being in control starts to slip away. And the resistance is out of that last vestige of control over me. And of course, the solutions in cases like that are bringing people in, which then pokes at the element of privacy. I don't want a stranger in my home. So figuring out where the resistance is, and what it will get to eventually is the cost. So when you were talking before about people being resistive, this is a framework of what things cost in the 1950s. And so when we look at today's prices for home care or durable medical equipment, or bringing someone in to consult to do a home safety assessment, it feels like a large number to our parents and our grandparents. So if we can have some sense of an ability to see the source of the resistance and then deal with the cost issue, and I will tell adult children, you can listen to the resistance to cost, but what you need to focus on with dad is value. That for an investment, for some cost on this side, you get to stay home. You get to stay in control. If you'd be willing to invest in the cost of an emergency response system, I've fallen down and I can't get up, we'll put off the decision to have home care. So there will be no strangers in your house if you'd be willing to rent the wristwatch. So I'm not worried about you having fallen down in the hallway. We're all resistant to change. And we just become more of that as we get older. So we're looking at people who've mastered the skill of doing it my way. And we need to honor that, because we all want to do it our way. And when there's a crisis, it's even more threatening. And I think looking for what people want to have happen, it may not be realistic, but as a son, I realize sometimes I rush in to talk to my dad about what he needs. And I lose sight of what he wants. He wants privacy, he wants control, he wants to make the decision, he wants to be in charge. My job is to kind of help move that pedestal a little bit one way or the other so that he has enough data to get as close to the right decision as possible.
When I've brought you in to work with clients, I've been very impressed with how you're able to speak respectfully and win their trust quickly, and be able to ask some very personal questions, pretty much right out of the box. I could work on it for probably months or years and not come to your level of skill with it, but I think it's important to have somebody help with the conversations and help look at the choices. I can't see really any way around it, because nobody I know is really equipped that knows the terrain until they get there, and then they've learned the hard way. So
yeah, that's probably a very nice way to describe that. The terrain is unknown. We haven't practiced this drill for elder care. It does come back to the thing that I know is at the heart of your practice, which is the relationship. And when we are able to develop that, we get to ask some of those most personal questions that give us some insight into how people operate and what they'd like to have happen.
So I appreciate those thoughts. Let's talk about the legal side of it a little bit. The advance directives, as they're collectively known. These are the documents through which people make their wishes known. ahead of time and have some reasonable assurance that they might be followed. So that element of control comes back.
Well, and from an estate planning perspective or from a paperwork perspective, my dad got sold on his advanced directives and eventually developing a trust because he could be in control from, I said, you could be in control from beyond the grave, which he thought was
Beautiful. That's
very
the best thing
appealing
ever.
to him. And so there are a number of documents, and I'm not an attorney, so I need to do that. But I think talking with someone or finding a resource, almost every county in the state of California, in fact across the country, has a legal assistance for the elderly office, where you can get some kind of very surface advice about things, or maybe get a recommendation for an elder law specialist. And we'll talk about this later, but the area agencies on aging all over the country have information lines that are open 24/7. But those discussions include things that are called durable powers of attorney, and there are two. One is a durable power for healthcare, where I can appoint my wife as my decision maker or agent when I can't or don't want to make a decision about healthcare. The partner to that is the durable power of attorney for asset management, which has provides an agent some ability to manage the financial side of things, and it can be very broad or very narrow. The more personal decisions are designated through documents like a living will, which says if things get to a point in my life I prefer no more treatment, no more intervention. The do not resuscitate form, which someone might fill out, that says if I cease to function and the paramedics come, I prefer that they don't intervene. And then the final form, which is probably the newest of the group, is called a POLST, or a physician's order for life-sustaining treatment, which is a little bit more of a comprehensive document that allows me to make statements about life choices, what I would like, what I wouldn't like, in more of a narrative way. And you can download the POLST from the internet and fill it out. It's also available with a number of healthcare providers. But these are documents that really get at that element of control and making sure that I've designated what I want, rather than having a healthcare provider decide what I need at the moment of a medical crisis. And again, I think it's important if you do this, and you should, that you work with someone who has a sense of what the documents do. My experience with clients who have had a trust written for them is that the documents, the durable powers, are inside of the trust language itself. But I always ask families to take a look at that so I know who the decision makers are if there's a healthcare crisis and we need to bring in other stakeholders.
These documents are really important, and I usually recommend that folks talk to a specialist in estate planning at least, because estate planning is a complex area, and even having these documents carried out can be complex. We don't have time to go into it here, but you can have that durable power of attorney for healthcare or the living will and walk into a hospital and have resistance there from the medical staff, and you kind of have to know what your rights are and how to use these things.
Well, and with the the privacy guidelines that are in place now, you really need to be walking around with a document in your pocket if you're a family member and you want access to charts and talking to doctors. The last form on the slide is called a diminishing capacity letter. I'm more familiar with what's called a mental health power of attorney. California has one. Many states do, some don't. But that's also a document where you can make a declaration that if my capacity is declining or would happen to decline in some situation, these are the things that I would like to have in place to protect my rights.
Wow. Well, I learned something new already. And the diminishing capacity letter is something that we can use in our business, in our industry, financial planning, that the client gives permission ahead of time that if we start to notice that they're slipping, which many people will at some point. We have many clients in their 80s and 90s. It's pretty surprising. But they've been with us a long time and they're still here, so we're happy about that. And doing pretty well in most cases, like going to the gym every morning in the 90s. I mean, more I can manage.
So that
But
person's my role model.
Well, I've got a couple of them that we're going to have them do some seminars for us. That would be awesome. But it's permission for us to contact a given family member or set the wheels in motion to check it out and be sure everything's okay. Because we have seen that. And of course, if a person's capacity is diminished, they're not in a position necessarily to be a good judge of whether that's true or not.
Well, and the value of this as well is that the family's not always involved in the discussions that we're having with Dad or Uncle Bob or Aunt Shirley. And so if we've never had an occasion to meet these other family members, or for some reason a client's not talking to kids and grandkids about the discussions with Jim or with Peter, the documents give you a little bit of structure, if you will, for understanding that there's been a vote of confidence put into your role or my role or the role of a nephew in carrying the plan forward when Dad's not capable of doing that.
A very difficult position for us to be in when we see somebody's not doing it as well as they have been and their finances are in jeopardy, and yet we have confidentiality and privacy, and that's the last thing that a person would want, to be shared unless they've thought about it ahead of time. We've worked something out. One of our clients had a son who called us and said, Mom's responding to every request for money that she gets, and I think she's spent $40,000 or something. And I'm worried about it. I want to set something up, and we kind of questioned whether there was really something going on or not. But one time the client showed up for a 10 o'clock appointment at 10 o'clock at night, and at that point we kind of knew that there was something wasn't quite going on right there. And we called an attorney and had to dance around it a little bit. I think we've covered the family dynamics pretty well, but one topic that comes up all the time, really, maybe the first one that our clients bring up, is the retirement housing decision. What are some of the various kinds of living facilities, and what do they offer, and what do they cost?
Well, there are probably 7 or 8 different levels of housing, and when we talk about that, it's beyond me being in my home now and what my imagination is for that kind of the third stage or my elderly years. And some of the models we know best are the Sun City model or the Leisure World model, which is an independent living community, usually restricted to people who are 55 or 50 and over, and it looks like any other neighborhood in the community. It's just that it's an older cohort that is there, and these people are independent and some still working full on into their leisure years. One of the more recent phenomenons in housing is called the Continuum of Care Retirement Community, and by more recent 10 to 15 years or so. I have a client now who's in a CCRC that has 7 levels of care.
Wow.
So she went from her independent 2-bedroom condominium to apartment to assisted to skilled to memory care, and there is a step for hospice when that happens. Most of these models are opportunities to purchase life care. So you buy into a life care contract. There's always a monthly fee for other things, but in essence, you never have to leave that campus, and this appeals to a lot of people. Now, most of the Continuum of Care retirement communities have a very vibrant independent living kind of situation, so it's appealing to folks who know I can go there and do my leisure and my socialization and maybe continue my lifestyle, but that this can be home for me for the rest of my days.
And some of them have provisions where even if you run out of money, they're not going to.
Those are fewer and farther in between. Most of these are a business proposition that are backed by private owners, so they will vet you pretty thoroughly on not only what your healthcare needs are, but what your financial assets are as well, to ensure that you will pay. The ones I'm most familiar with have a caveat in the contract that says that if at some point there are not enough assets to cover the cost needs here, we will invite you to go to another environment of care. There are a few, but that if financially, if you're you've planned well, then that's a very good option. I always tell clients, when you look at a property like that, you also want to vet the ownership for the property, make sure that they're on solid ground financially, so that they can keep up their end of the contract. There are senior housing units throughout the community where seniors are living on a smaller scale in a condominium or an apartment. There is board and care, which is kind of shelter in place. My grandmother lived in a board and care home where she was independent, could take care of herself, but was starting to get to a point where she couldn't manage the meals and making sure she was safe at night. And while she didn't need personal care, she needed an environment that would kind of manage her going. This particular environment was owned and operated by a family, so there were children and cats and dogs, and a nice environment. The next level is assisted living, where I need a little bit of help with my bathing or my personal care, or I can't prepare my meals, or I don't want to. So someone needs to monitor my medicines or my diet. I have a number of clients who are pretty independent, still in and out of the community quite a lot, but live in an assisted living environment that is catering to people who are, for the most part, independent, but just need that element of oversight to make sure nothing happens. And then there's skilled care, what we typically know of as nursing homes, where that's skilled 24-hour care. Nursing homes in the Bay Area right now are probably going to run people from $7,000 to $8,000, $9,000, or $10,000 a month. Medicare will pay for the first few days of a nursing home stay if it's after a hospitalization, but most of the cost of nursing care long-term is going to come out of pocket. Assisted living, $3,000 to $7,000 a month. Again, I'm giving a range, and it's significantly less in other parts of the country. The continuum of care retirement communities that I have seen range from $150,000 to buy in up to $2 million to buy in, depending on that kind of level of ambiance that you would like. And then there's a fee of anywhere from $3,000 to $6,000 or $7,000 a month for meals and all of that. There's hospice care, which is set up to treat people who have a terminal illness. Memory care for someone who's physically healthy but has an issue with dementia, Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease. Memory care units can be very expensive too, $4,000 to $7,000 or more a month, because they're not paid for at all by Medicare. There are some long-term care insurance policies that will help with the cost, but for people who haven't planned around a long-term care insurance policy, it can be very expensive.
I'll say, I think you were the one who suggested that I check out board and care when my stepmom was no longer able to get to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and she was falling, and her assisted living facility said, you need to find another place. And she obviously didn't want to move, of course, but we found a board and care nearby in a private home, and it was maybe a 5-bedroom home with some 2 or 3 caregivers around the clock there. So she didn't have to cook the meals. She didn't have to take care of her getting to and from the toilet. They took care of that. Pretty much she was bedridden, and they took just wonderful care of her. And the cost, as I recall, was about $3,000 a month, which was no more than we were paying just for that assisted living apartment. We were getting so much more. I would drop in unexpectedly, and she'd be all tucked in, sheets nice and neat and clean, and she had her little button that she could still press her element of control. And another one of my clients is in Phoenix right now in that kind of situation, and she's been actually getting better. She had a little run-in with some medicines in the hospital that didn't agree with her, and she's getting better, and she really enjoys the atmosphere and socializing with the other residents. It's just a terrific thing.
Well, and Peter, I think that last example is another way to remind people how things have changed, that there are folks who will end up in a nursing home or assisted living or rehab for a short window of time to recuperate from that medicine event, pneumonia, broken hip. and go back home and do fine. But making sure that you're at that most appropriate level of care at the time that it's needed to make the potential for getting better as high as possible. Gives people a chance to figure out, do I need to accommodate the home now with ramps or guardrails or something in the bathroom or changing the appliances. Oftentimes a home safety assessment where you're looking from front porch to back porch about what we can do to make this safer, how do we minimize the risks, how do we give dad what he wants, which is to be home for as long as possible.
I've got my eye on the clock, and I'm thinking we want to have some time for Q&A and wrapping up. There are obviously a lot of financial considerations involved here. I think we've touched on those a little bit. The personal resources, the family resources, both in terms of not only money, but the services that people can provide. Long-term care insurance, you touched on that. We have a consultant on retainer with our firm, and I would like to take this opportunity to remind our clients that they can get free consultations that are objective from our consultant at any time. They can take a look at their existing policies, they can look at buying policies, they can look at alternatives to having the insurance to get the long-term care.
Well, and Peter, I've worked with you long enough to know that you're referring your clients to people who are first going to educate your clients about what the it is before they ever start the selling process. I think that having people at least ask questions about things like long-term care insurance, reverse mortgages, in-home care, you don't have to make the commitment. But we do have checklists. I do not sell long-term care insurance, but with the help of folks like the specialists that you have, we put together a list of 10 or 12 questions that people ask so they're educated about the it, about the product with no commitment. So that's one of the things we try and do is help people with tools that educate them to products and services like this.
Yeah, why don't you back up the slides a little bit to the suggested reading list, and then we'll look at that and the websites, and you can have those going while I kind of wrap up and give people some last minute suggestions here. We've got 3 books on here, and a 36-hour day, taking care of aging family members, and Chicken Soup for the Caregiver's Soul. These are Jim's recommendations, and then we have a few websites too. The area agencies on aging that you mentioned, which are all over the country.
There are over 600.
Wow.
In the States, yeah. So they're pretty available almost anywhere you are. It's a free phone call to ask questions.
I looked at all these websites briefly, and there's a lot of information on each one. So.
Well, and Family Caregiver Alliance, which is in San Francisco, is considered one of the best resources for caregivers in the country. They're really a remarkable job that they do.
Good to know. Good to know. A lot of information. Geriatric care managers. I guess that would probably be a listing or directory of those folks all over the country.
It is, and you can find people by zip code or by location. If you go in and do 94022, you'll see the listing for my practice. But then you can also go in and look at what it is the care manager does. Every care manager who is doing what he or she should do will be willing to talk with you at no cost for a while about what they do, what their fees are, provide references so that you can vet them to make sure that you're getting a product that's worth your time and your money.
Speaking of that, given that I'm sort of an internet child myself, I am always looking for those places that evaluate businesses and products. So Amazon's reviews on books and different products that I buy there are just invaluable. Like, Yelp is useful, and Google Plus or Google whatever local business comments people make. Is there anything like that for the services that are in the elder care space?
it's not as good yet as it should be. Most counties now are getting into the business of vetting the facilities, skilled nursing, assisted living, memory care. So county health departments and state associations are trying to develop databases that will tell you where these housing options fall in the continuum in terms of doing real well and maybe not so well. The care managers and the elder law attorney models aren't as good as they could be. I have found that when I'm looking for a care manager in another part of the country for somebody, I just need to do the interview and find out if they, at least on the phone and on the computer, look like they know what they're doing. So we're still trying to figure out how to create a safety net that helps people with quality. We're not quite where we need to be yet on that.
An opportunity for somebody out there to bring some
I
useful
think the Area
information.
Agency on Aging does a pretty good job of vetting based on the experience they have with attorneys and care managers and home care agencies. So sometimes you call the Area Agency and say, I need a care manager in Phoenix or San Francisco or Los Altos or Seattle. And they typically will give you the names of 3 or 4. But you can figure those 3 or 4, they probably had some experience with them on the positive side.
Oh, great. Glad to hear that those area agencies on aging can give you some opinions. It's not like the government inspector who comes out and says, you've got termites or you've got a gas leak, but we can't tell you who to get it fixed by,
Right.
even though we know. Like,
Yeah.
that's frustrating.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Oh, we've got some very useful websites. If you can't see this on your screen, you can contact us. You can send me an email or us here at PW Johnson, and I can send you this slide deck in a PDF format or just the websites or whatever. Happy to do that. Jim, people might want to talk to you. How do you work and what do you charge?
We're a fee-based organization, so we have some services where we charge by the hour.
Mm-hmm.
So if people would like to have a conversation, a consultation, first we would have a no-fee chat for 15 or 20 minutes to make sure I'm the one that can help them. Our conversations and our consultations are billed at $175 an hour. If people want a home safety assessment done, which is where we go to the home and spend a couple hours looking at the environment, I have about a 58-point checklist that we take people through, and then we write up a summary of what we see, where the risks are, recommendations for what they might need to do, and in a lot of cases suggestions for where to find the resource. Those are $500. If people want to work with us on an ongoing basis, we will define what it is they want, figure out what schedule works for them, and then work at that $175 an hour figure. The final thing is that we will do comprehensive assessments of the individual and the environment, where we go in and look at people's physical capacity, cognitive capacity, how they're managing the environment, and in partner with that, how the environment is, and write up a summary of what we recommend and resources for that. That's $750. People may use us as a part of that plan moving forward, or because they have a written plan and want to move ahead on their own, they'll be able to do that as well.
Great. Well, I think it's money well spent. Knowing the layout of the land and the opportunities and pitfalls is well worth it. If you'd like to explore how your finances might be impacted by elder care decisions or start the conversation with your parents or family, also feel free to contact us here at PW Johnson. That's part of the services that we provide our ongoing clients. Life transitions and planning obviously are part and parcel. We have the opportunity to have a huge impact on people's well-being here. Jim and I often work together to help people sort through the options available and create plans for their families. I also have an article that I'm happy to share, which is, I think I called it How to Start the Conversation, but it's kind of innocuous ways to begin to communicate with parents, for example. And parents could use it too. Simple things like, gee, Mom, I read this article in the paper and it kind of scared me. I wouldn't want that to happen to you. It's like, oh, okay. There's sort of a natural entree to a conversation. So let me give contact information for Jim and for us. Jim's email address is jmeldercare@yahoo.com. So jmeldercare@yahoo.com. And his phone number is 650-383-5221. And if you want the slide deck or the article on how to start the conversation, or if you are a client and you've been inspired by our conversation today, you can reach us at info@pwjohnson.com or at 408-747-1222. And our next call, which we're going to be doing in the next probably 2 or 3 weeks, is on the changes in the laws governing Social Security, which there have been some big changes recently in planning for that. And we have a 6-month window where people can still take action if they're at the right age and in the right kinds of situations. We'll be sending out an announcement about that to everyone on the list who received the announcement for today's call. If you're not on our list already and you'd like to be, then send us an email at info@pwjohnson.com for that. And with that, we went a few minutes over, but I think it was all really good content. Thank you, Jim, for your time.
My pleasure.
And thank you all for attending, and we will see you on the next call.